Welcome to the e-commerce podcast with me, your host, Matt Edmondson. This is a show all about helping you deliver e-commerce wow. And to help us do just that, I am chatting with my very special guest, Matt Stafford from Build, Grow, Scale, about how to get your website to rocket in growth. Now, it's no exaggeration to say that this episode has probably been the longest episode in terms of getting in the calendar. So you know it's going to be worth it. You're going to want to grab your notebooks. You are going to want to grab your pens or whatever your note-taking device is, because there's going to be some great stuff to help you grow your e-commerce business, and to be honest with you, to help me grow mine as well. If you don't know, if you're new with us, then yes, I am like you. I'm an e-commerce entrepreneur. Love e-commerce. I love the fact that whenever I wake up in the morning, somebody in the world has bought something from one of my websites. It's a beautiful thing. And so I do this show just so I can connect with amazing people and learn about e-commerce and hopefully give you guys some value as well. So if it's your first time with us, a very warm welcome to you. And of course, if you're a regular, thanks for coming back. Really appreciate you being with us on this part of our journey. If you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to the newsletter, because every week we send out the newsletter. It's actually changing, the new one coming out is called the eCommerce. It's getting developed. It's getting upgraded. We've moved it to Beehive. We're throwing in some extra stuff, as well as all the usual show notes and links and all that sort of stuff from the guest. We throw in more tips, more strategies, more helpful stuff. It's all in there. So you're going to want to find out more about it. You can do that at ecommercepodcast.net. Now, let's talk about Mr. Matthew Stafford. It's always good to talk to a fellow Matt. Yes, it is. He is the CEO and mastermind behind Build, Grow, Scale's revenue optimization system. With 27 years of business experience, he's a pro at spotting hidden opportunities and optimizing the customer journey. Known as one of the top Shopify optimization experts, he's analyzed nearly $1 billion in data to perfect his approach. That's a lot of data, Matt. I'm not going to lie. How did that work out for you?
Well, it's been cumulative over the last several years. I think we stopped counting just going through our own shopping carts around 400 million several years ago, because if you think about it, it's someone that's running their store, whether it's 10 million, 400 million, or $1 billion, like it's really hard to even fathom that amount. And so the only reason the bigger numbers is maybe just to stroke our ego a little bit. But I think realistically, we have enough data that we have a set of best practices that we know will help anyone.
Fantastic. Wow, that sounds great. That sounds absolutely wonderful. So I'm curious, how did it all start for you? I mean, it obviously didn't start one day you woke up and thought, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through $1 billion worth of data. No. Hopefully there's something a bit more interesting.
Yeah. Well, I actually started out in the brick and mortar businesses. So I had commercial concrete and a couple of brick and mortar salons. And in that process, I realized when I opened up the brick and mortar stores, I had to get traffic. It wasn't quite like the service business that we had with concrete. And so I learned how to do some online, website, or not actually, back then it wasn't website optimization. It was really like how to get the people to the website.
Yeah.
And that's about all you had to do back then.
Yeah.
And
I remember those days well. Very fondly too.
Once that happened, I realized this is kind of fun. Like, it's my job or my livelihood's not dependent on the weather. And so it made me want to look into that a lot more. And I went to a Tony Robbins event, and he was selling a DVD series called Money Masters. Yeah. And it was all about online marketing. And I thought, wow, in 5 years, I'm going to be 100% online and get rid of this other stuff that I have. And it was almost 5 years to the month that that became true for me. And I was like, wow, maybe I should have said 3 years or 2 years. But in that process, what I had done is I learned how to run Facebook ads to marketing pages and sell things, and was pretty good at it. Through that process, eventually Shopify was pretty new at the time. I opened a Shopify site and we started selling kitchen products, and did really well right off the bat. And I thought, oh, wow, this is going to be really easy. And I started adding all kinds of apps and different things to my Shopify site. And what happened in about a 6-month period is we went from selling 300 or 400 sales a day down to 300 or 400 sales a week. And it was a lot harder to make money. And I was just super frustrated. And so I paid a guy. I saw a guy online was advertising for $1,000. He would give you 6 calls and teach you Google Analytics. I thought, okay, I'll do that. So I paid him the $1,000. And after the first week, I was like, oh my goodness, there's so much data in here to figure out how to make my website work better that I'm going to do that. And every time I made changes, my ads worked better. And so within the end of that 6 weeks, we were back to the 300-400 sales a day, very profitable, and started scaling it up from there.
That says worth $1,000 then.
Oh man, it's crazy.
You talk about a return on investment. That sounds like that was one of the best things I'd spent $1,000 on.
Yeah, there was the scarier part of that story is because of the first 3 or 4 months we had done really good. We had been out, got a loan, and borrowed a bunch of money and private labeled the stuff from China. So we had about $400,000 worth of kitchen supplies sitting in a warehouse, and it kept getting worse and worse and worse. And we had more coming on the boat. And so I was, we were not in a good position. And I was like, I had to figure it out or I was going to be hurting. And it was literally that $1,000 saved me hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost revenue.
Wow. Well, what a fascinating story. It's interesting it started with Tony Robbins. I have another podcast called Push to Be More where it's a leadership podcast, talk to business leaders, and I pick their brain about how to run a business. Great podcast, really enjoy it. It's really good fun. One of the questions I asked them at the start of the interview is, if you could interview anybody, in your own podcast, past or present, that's had a big influence on your life, who would it be and why? And by far, one of the most popular answers, you've got the most popular answers that have come through are my dad, Jesus, and Tony Robbins. And it's quite fascinating how many people mention Tony Robbins, especially from, your side of the pond. He seems to have been quite an influential character.
Yeah, for sure. I would say, so interesting you bring that up. I didn't think we were going to go there with this, but I'd love to for a second. I dealt with a lot of trauma growing up, and going through his programs helped me realize that a lot of it has, we can reframe a lot of that and to be supportive. And the more that I've talked about that part of my journey with other entrepreneurs, the more I realized that it's pretty common. And so I started studying that similar to how I studied a website and thought like, well, why is it so common amongst entrepreneurs that, they have this in their background? And the definition of trauma is just a feeling of loss of control. And so I thought like, well, in business, how often do you feel like you're really in control? You're constantly doing things. And so it made sense to me that the majority of us that are entrepreneurs have dealt with that feeling of loss of control, and we have a coping mechanism to handle it. Doesn't mean it's healthy, but we have a coping mechanism that allows us to be in an environment that is constant chaos, and for us to be able to make order from that and then move forward. Because the normal employees look at what we do and they're like, no way, I don't want anything to do with that. And so I think that has a lot to do with, why people resonate with him, or why, entrepreneurs in general really get a lot from talking to each other, because like we have a unique set of circumstances that we went through growing up that give us the ability to do that.
Well, it's a powerful insight, man. It's one of those where, and again, I totally agree. Everyone that comes on the show, it's an interesting definition of the word trauma you use, the loss of control. And and there's always some event, there's always some catalyst which starts. And I find it really interesting listening to them talk about that, because I think as entrepreneurs, even in the digital space, whether, there is something about entrepreneurs that I find quite captivating, that I have I have questions, and I really enjoy getting to chat with people like yourself and sort of dig into it a little bit. So anyway, before we get off into the whole push to be more podcast channel, you started to dig in the weeds. You started to get into Google Analytics. One of the things that I find about Google Analytics, and Matt, maybe you've got some thoughts on this, is there is so much. I mean, you had to pay a guy $1,000 to teach you what to look at and to understand it. It seems to me like with tools like Analytics, Google Analytics, there's paralysis analysis, isn't there? There's so much data, you don't know where to begin, so you don't know what to look at. Yeah,
100%. If you think about it, the problem with Google Analytics is they have a set of preset filters that don't necessarily work for e-commerce. There is like optimized, there's the optimized e-commerce tab that you can go to that has a bunch of stuff, but that's not necessarily everything that you need. And so what we've found is the more that we work on it over time, we use the tag manager, which is basically a set of filters that then puts the data into Google Analytics in a way that you can analyze it. And without using the tag manager to set all that up, it makes it a lot harder and much, a lot more difficult to go through. But it's still, I guess it reminds me of like in advertising, they say 50% of the advertising is working. You just don't know which 50%. And so the nice thing about Google Analytics is you can use that to figure out which part is working, stop the rest, and double down on what's working. And that alone will radically shift your business.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are some of the things then that you found to look at? I mean, analytics is a big pool. You've got your tag manager set up. But if I come to you as a new client, what's sort of one of the first things that you look at in that data?
Well, we always start at the back of the store, which is the cart and the checkout, because if we can optimize that, anything else that we do on the site generates more revenue. Right. But if your cart and your checkout aren't optimized, if I fix your homepage and make it work way better, and now you get a bunch of people to a collection page, that hasn't necessarily made you more money if the cart's still broken. And so we start at the back, optimize the cart and the checkout, and then move forward, or then move from there to the next. So we then go to, the product pages, then the collection pages, then the homepage, which seems counterintuitive because everybody thinks like, oh, I want my homepage to look nice, do all this other stuff. I want you to make more money right from the very beginning. And that's why we call it revenue optimization, not conversion rate optimization, because your conversion rate can go up and you cannot make more money. I can just put your products on sale. Your conversion rate is going to go up. But that doesn't necessarily get you what we're looking for. That's a temporary fix. And so it's obviously an important metric, but it's a little bit of a vanity metric. If your entire store works better, you're going to make more net revenue, not just a higher top line.
I love that. Revenue optimization. Is that a phrase that you've coined?
Yeah. We've actually even trademarked it because other people started using it. So, but yeah.
Love that. It's like, I own this space now, boys and girls. Yeah. Revenue optimization. It's interesting you start at the back. And to me, it makes total sense. I get the logic. I understand the flow. I guess I'm curious, there's a lot of people listening to the show who will use sites like Shopify. We mentioned that at the start, I think. Although I keep getting Shopify and Spotify mixed up when I'm talking to people. It's so annoying. They're so similar. But people use sites like Shopify, Shopline's coming up. You've got a few of these now where the checkout process is, it seems, fixed. How would you sort of encourage or speak to those guys?
Yeah, there is things that you can do. So we have a lot of our clients are on the Plus version, which gives us the ability to do that. But there's some very subtle changes that will make a huge difference, and I'll give them to your audience for free today. I guarantee you that if they do this, they'll see a bump in their conversions.
Okay.
And so
everyone's listening now. They've all got their pens ready.
Yeah. It comes from a book called Persuasion by Robert Cialdini.
Great book.
He talked about how people don't mind giving you information if you give them a reason why. And he uses an example of someone cutting in line. And they say, hey, do you mind if I cut in line? 80% of people said, no, you can't cut in line. But then they said literally the exact same thing, except for they gave a reason. Hey, do you mind if I cut in line? My kids are late for school. And 80% of the people said yes. So they don't mind giving you, a yes if you give them a reason.
Yeah.
And so what we did is we tested when we were tracking form field errors in the checkout, which make a huge difference because that's where your conversions drop. We noticed that email and phone number is where we got the most form field errors. And so we thought, like, why don't we give them a reason why instead of just say email, phone? And so under the email one, we put email required for order notification or order confirmation. Sorry.
Yeah.
And we know that the order confirmation email is opened. It's the most opened email that you'll ever send. It's about an 80% open rate.
Yeah.
And so we thought, okay, if we use that, we know that they already are going to, 80% of people are going to open it. We'll get better information. And we reduced our form field errors by over 200%.
Wow.
So it was crazy difference. And then, and we've tried all different texts in there. We kept thinking like, oh, this is a big deal. Let's try to figure this out. And we've never been able to beat that. Required for order confirmation. Then under the phone, you put phone required for shipping notification. And we tried like, we'll never call, or phone for shipping notification, we'll never call you. That like tanked conversions.
Okay.
And we were like, oh, okay. We introduced a problem that they weren't thinking about. Like, we probably didn't assume we were going to call them, but now that we said that, they're afraid we are.
Yeah.
And so just phone required for shipping notification. You do those two things. We've had as much as a 17% lift just in the checkout alone from doing that. And one was on a digital product, and they do about 60 million a year. So just that change gave
17% is really handy on 60 million.
Yeah, it was crazy. So it's that alone's been phenomenal for the different checkouts, and you don't need Shopify Plus to do it. You just go to the language settings and you can change the form field in there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, I love that. Definitely be instigating those with the team. But I'm curious with is the reason you start at the back and move forward because the back is where the low hanging fruit is? Is it easier, for example, with these tweaks that you talked about in the checkout? I guess by the time somebody's already got to this part of the process, they're pretty keen and ready to buy. Whereas if you start on the homepage,
just fewer steps before the money transfers hands.
Right.
I really didn't think about it as like that. It's an easier place to do it. I just thought about it as really simply, if I get an increase right there, that means more revenue. And for me, if the very first things that we do for a client or a customer is help them get more revenue, they're much happier than me making them feel good because their homepage looks awesome. But, the first 3 weeks that we worked on everything, they're not making more money. If I can get them more money from day one or the first week, that gives us a little bit longer journey with them in order to actually create enough change that it's a great relationship.
Yeah. No, fair enough. It's a really interesting idea, and I love it because it's I'm a big fan of your revenue optimization trademarked name. I think it's quite clever. What else then do you see? What are some of the common mistakes you see businesses make?
Well, another principle that we use a lot is called the hierarchy of focus. And what that means is when somebody lands on a page, we want it to be obvious what the next most important step is. And so if we use your product page as an example, the next most important step on a product page would be to add to cart.
Yeah.
And what we notice is a lot of people make everything on their theme match colors. And so everybody's like, oh, well, what matters? What's the best color? What's the best XYZ? And what we found is it means way less what the color is. Then, it doesn't matter if it's red, green, blue. We try not to use red because red means error on a website.
Yeah.
And so pretty much any color that stands out from the page. And what we found is, so if your theme is black and yellow, using a black or yellow button doesn't make that button stand out totally different than anything else. But if it's a green button on a black and yellow theme, then all of a sudden, like, it's really obvious. And people don't think that would make that big of a difference because it's the logical thing, but people just aren't logical. And we look at a website totally different than our customers do because we're looking at it all day, every day, and we have probably for years. Before COVID, online sales was only about 10% of sales made. During COVID, it went up to like 30% of sales were made online. And then it dropped back down to like 23, 24% afterwards. So there's still a lot of people that are just learning how to shop online. And we take for granted, because we've been doing it for the last 8-10 years, that everyone knows what we know, and they just don't.
Yeah, that's fair play. And is it I've had lots of conversations about the color of the buy now button. And I'm glad to hear you say it doesn't really matter too much. I mean, there is some impact, but it doesn't really matter too much what the color is. It just matters that it's unique and that it stands out.
Sticks out.
Is it a case then that actually you just use that color on the buy now button and that's the only place that you use it, or do you use it anywhere else?
No, we would use it on every button all the way through the page, through the site. So on the homepage, whatever the button, I will tell you this, the text on the button does matter, what it says. And we've proven that over and over and over. So people that have like buy now always converts way less than depending on where it's at. If it's on the product page, it should be add to cart.
Yeah.
And then when you get in the cart, it should be proceed to checkout, and then to shipping, and then to payment, and then to complete your order. You want them, people don't want to click on something if they don't know where it's going to take them. Yeah. And a lot of times what we've found is people are not ready to buy now when they add something to their cart, because, we've watched thousands and thousands of videos. People will put 8-10 items in their cart, and then they'll actually go to their cart and shop from there, remove things, and then check out. And so the buy now button, that text is terrible for them because they're like, oh, I'm not ready to buy yet. I'm still browsing. And so by going through those micro commitments in the text, we've essentially found a way to make it much easier for them to do that. So like homepage, we use like learn more or more options, see more, stuff like that. So that they're like, oh, okay, there's other things that I can go look at. That takes me to a collection page that has like multiple options. And then it's like, more choices or things like that. And then add to cart, then proceed to checkout, etc. So that matters more than the color. But the color needs to be something that stands out so that they see what the next most important step is.
Which is, going back to the color, it makes sense. It's what I see on a lot of websites where the main call to action button is a specific color, and you only ever see that color on call to action buttons. I'm curious, Matt, if you've played around with the what's the word I'm looking for? I read a report, and I'm desperately trying to think in my head where I saw this data from. Changing the text from add to cart to add to my cart. Have you tested that by throwing the word my in there? Because one of the reports I read was actually if you use the word my or some sort of ownership, it results in like a 37% uplift.
We will be testing that. We will test that right away because I haven't that I know of. Maybe some of our team has, but yeah, that makes sense to me. I would love to try that. Yeah.
Well, let me know the results of because this is something that I've been wondering whether we should play with. We've played around with it a little bit on some of our websites, but I haven't done it directly on the add to cart button.
And I do know that if you put like a little lock symbol or a cart, that actually does increase the add to cart. So for us, like basically we put a little lock and it says add to cart, or it says add to cart and we put a cart on there. And those little symbols actually do increase.
They did, yeah. It's interesting to use a lock icon as I mean, I've seen it obviously with the basket or the shopping cart icon. I've seen the lock icon on secure checkout securely or whatever it is. I've not seen it on the add to cart button.
Yeah. So another thing that we use is we'll put the number of items and the price in the button. That's helped a lot because if people don't realize that they've actually clicked it twice, it will show, or what the quantity is. And what we found is there is way less cart abandonment by having that there. And the reason, the assumption that we made is, they're not getting into the cart and then seeing a different price and thinking like, oh, this is more expensive than I thought it was. When really all they had done is click 2 of them.
That's really good. I'm going to try that one as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if we've ever done that. It's wrecking my brain.
Yeah, so we have the number of the quantity and the price in the button itself.
So it will say add to t-shirts to
It'll say add to cart and it'll 1 in the price. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Like it. Oh, I'm getting lots of tips here, Matt. This is great, and I gonna be experimenting and testing. Where do you these sort of micro adjustments? I remember I've had lots of these sort of conversations whereby you can put sort of 3 or 4 of them together, and this might have half a percentage impact over here. But when you add sort of 4 or 5 of them, actually the numbers start to add up,
Yeah.
And it starts to make a big difference. Is that what we're finding more these days, that actually it's more about the micro adjustments as opposed to finding the killer that's going to give me a 30% uplift kind of thing? Or are they still out there?
Yeah, no, we're still looking for that. And I think websites are contextual. So, a lot of times where people make the mistake is they go, oh, well, this site sells a lot, I'm going to do what they're doing. Well, they don't realize their demographic might be a 40-year-old male. And, the website that they're comparing it to is, Kylie Jenner, because she's a billionaire and sells all this makeup. Well, it's a huge difference because they own their traffic and their site can be really crappy. And they'll still sell a lot, and people will a lot of times mimic really crappy sites because they're doing really well because they own their traffic rather than they got to buy their traffic. And so I would say it's really a combination of both. You can get the big wins, but for us, we have a set of best practices that we go through first that have a lot of the principles that we know win every time. I always say clarity trumps persuasion. So a lot of times people are trying to be very fancy and use flowery words and a brand, language, etc. But it's really confusing to the customer that doesn't understand it because they're not the ones that created it. And so what we want to do is keep things as prototypical as possible, which means similar to other sites that people use, because in doing that, they don't have to, it reduces the cognitive load. They don't have to think through what they're doing in order to buy from you. So all of those things that people are trying to be fancy actually end up hurting their sales. I always say traffic's not your problem. Most e-commerce sites convert around 2%, maybe a little above, a little below. It kind of goes back and forth. And everybody thinks oh, I need more traffic. I need more traffic. I'm like, no, you had 100 people come to your site. 2 people bought, 98 people left, and you're trying to get another 100 people there. My theory is if I make my website work better, I'm going to get 2 more of those 98 people that left, and I'm going to double my business on the same amount of ad spend. And the moment we did that and we learned how to do that, we've been able to create, I think, over 117 or 120 some sites that do over $1 million a year. We have like 20 of them now that are over $10 million a year in our students. It's replicatable. And, over the last 10 years, we had about 1,000 students. We have more than 20, if you think about it, more than 20% of them have hit that $1 million mark. If you look at Shopify statistics, it's less than 1% ever even make a sale of people that open the stores.
Yeah.
So to have 25% of them turn into, or 20% of them turn into $1 million businesses out of 1,000, what we do works.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Yeah, I love that. There was something quite galling to me whenever I remember a chap called me and said, listen, our website does, I think it was $750,000 they were doing in sales. And he was like, I think we need to double our ad spend on the website. Can you help us? And I'm like, well, one, I don't manage ad spend, but I'm probably fairly sure your issue is not your ad spend. And so we had a look at his competitor's website, and it was very apparent that his website, his competitor was doing 7 times conversion. So they were converting 7 customers for every one he was converting. I'm like, there's your problem right there.
Yeah.
It's not a traffic thing; it's a conversion thing. I mean, you could argue, were they getting better traffic? But fundamentally, it's the exact same principle. Look at the traffic first and figure out how you can convert it better and optimize that before you start going and spending way more money on advertising. Because I think we get stuck in this place where it's like, my website's got 2% conversion. That's kind of where it has to stay.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? And so the easy lever to pull is ad spend.
We have customers now that have been with us 7-8 years. They're around 6-7%. It's crazy. We would have never thought that was possible, but just over time, it just keeps getting better and better. It just works better. The other thing, oh man, I lost my train of thought. Yep, I lost my train of thought. So,
it'll come back. It always does.
Okay,
there you go.
Now. Yeah, I remember now. So another thing you have to remember is the difference between mobile and desktop. We started 10 years ago. The majority was on desktop, and mobile was not even close. It was probably 80-20, 80% desktop, 20% mobile. Now it's 80 to 90% mobile, 10 to 20% desktop. And so you can use your Google Analytics to see if you have issues there too. With all of the data that we've captured and looked at, we know that desktop should convert twice as high as mobile.
Okay.
So if you're converting at 2% mobile, your desktop should convert 4%. Otherwise, something's broken. But they should be 2 different experiences. And so you get away with a lot more on desktop because you have a lot more real estate to work with.
I do.
On mobile, you have to be very, very specific. And if you think about it, if you have a lot of products and you're forcing people to scroll through a lot of products, you wonder why, like, you have 5 or 6 of your 20 products that sell, 5 times as much. It's because people either look at those first few and leave, or those other ones never even get seen. And so what we found is on your category pages, to have a really good set of filters matters a lot. We've seen as much as a 300 to 500% increase, especially on like clothing sites and things like that have a lot of options. When they can pare it down to find what they're looking for much easier, the conversion rate goes way up. So filters and search traffic, like the search bar, those are your 2 most valuable forms of website visitors. Like if you can get them to use the filters or the search bar, you'll double your conversion.
Yeah, we found the same thing, actually. The customers who typed and it didn't matter what it was. They just really typed anything in the search bar. It didn't have to be a product. It could have been an ingredient, or it could have been something, sort of a how-to type thing. Anybody that typed anything in that search bar became a much more valuable customer. Double
the value and double the conversion. I'll give you a little story that we've learned a lot of lessons. This is kind of a damaging admission. We used to say, well, if you don't have more than 4 or 5 products, you don't need search bar. Like they're going to find all your products. And what we realized is people will type in their problem And then a lot of times, if you don't have the solution, but it's what's being typed in a lot of times, that tells you what your next product can be.
Yeah. Sorry, let me just get rid of. I thought I had my phone on Do Not Disturb. Sorry.
That's okay. And so we had a site called Cupcoats. And what we realized is, it was like a hoodie for little kids that they could take it off and it would fold into itself and become a stuffed animal. Well, the number 1 and number 2 search terms were unicorn and unicorn spelled wrong. And over like a 4-year period. And we're like, wow, we don't have a unicorn. So they came out with a unicorn and they launched it on Amazon Prime Day. And they did a little over $500,000 in 48 hours.
Holy moly.
So it literally, there's gold in that information if you're tracking it, looking at it, and learning from it.
That's a really good point, actually. One of the questions I have for the team tomorrow is, are we tracking that search bar data? I'm sure we are.
Yeah. So just what are they typing in there?
Yeah. And just looking at that, I think will be quite fascinating.
Yeah, you can. Because it is gold. You can use it to describe how to solve problems, etc. There's we've used that for all kinds of things. I'll give you one more really, really good tip that all your users can use. And they can use like Hotjar, Lucky Orange, or whatever to install it. What we do, and this is the very first thing we do on every client site that we start, is we put a pop-up on the thank you page that pops up and it asks this question: what was the one thing that almost made you not buy?
Okay.
And so those people that just spent money with you will tell you what was difficult, what they didn't understand, what almost prevented them from buying. And you take that information, you go back and you fix it on the website. I can tell you that probably 6 of our top 10 winners of all time came from that question on the thank you page from the customer telling us what was difficult for them.
Wow. Love that. That's a really, we don't do that I do know, Matt. Yeah. So thank you for that. Listen, man, there's been a lot of value that you've delivered here. And before we go further, I really need to just be aware of time and to say, what's your question for me? This is where we break the conversation slightly. This is where I ask my guests for a question. If you're new to the show, I ask my guests for a question. I take that question and answer it on social media. So, Matt, what's your question for me?
If you were writing a book about your life, what chapter would you be in right now?
Whoa, that's a great question. That's a lovely question, and I will be answering that on social media. If you don't follow me, come find me on Instagram or LinkedIn, Matt Edmondson. That's all you need to know. You'll find me there. But Matt, listen, thank you for the question, and thank you for all the value that you've brought today. If people want to know more about you, if they want to connect with you, maybe even get you to look over their website. I don't know what your process is or how you kickstart that whole thing. Maybe you could just let us know.
Yeah, so our website is buildgrowscale.com. And then on there, they can fill out forms to get us to do that or even to schedule a call. Or my email is matt@buildgrowscale.com. And I answer all my own emails and take care of that. So super, I love what I do. I enjoy it. Have a lot of fun helping people. It's very fulfilling. So yeah, feel free to reach out or go to our website and look at the different things that we do and ways that we can help you.
That'd be great. And you've obviously got a big passion for it, which is nice, actually. It's lovely to hear when people have a passion for their topic. So thank you so much for coming on, brother. I really appreciate it. And as always, I've got lots of notes. You've given me some really interesting ideas to think about. So we're definitely going to go away and test a few things. And let's stay in touch over this because I'm really curious to see where it goes.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Matt.
Wonderful. Wow, what a great conversation. Let me do the usual. Hang on, here we go. Let's do this. There we go. Yes. This is what happens when you buy the new Rode sound desk. You get all these little sound pads and you Thanks, Matt. Really appreciate it. Now, be sure to follow the e-commerce podcast wherever you get your podcasts from, because we've got some more great conversations lined up. And I, of course, do not want you to miss any of them. And in case no one has told you yet today, let me be the first. You are awesome. Yes, you are. Created awesome. It's just a burden you've got to bear. Matt's got to bear it. I've got to bear it. You've got to bear it as well. Now, the e-commerce podcast is produced by PodJunction. You can find our entire archive of episodes on your favorite podcast app. The theme music was by Josh Edmondson. And as I mentioned, if you'd like to read the transcript, the show notes, and all that sort of good stuff, head over to the website, ecommercepodcast.net, which is where you can also sign up for the very good newsletter that I mentioned earlier. But do go check it out. But that's it from me. That's it from Matt. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a fantastic week wherever you are in the world. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.